Welcome to the Maine Science Podcast. I'm Kate Dickerson. I'm happy to present a bonus episode for the Maine Science Podcast. Ben Sprague, a longtime friend of the MSF, and a friend of mine as well, hosts a podcast called The Maine Show. Ben had an opportunity last week to talk to Dr. Jeremy Yardley, a pediatrician at Northern Light Eastern Maine Medical Center. Their conversation covered some of Jeremy's experience being a hospital physician in the time of COVID-19. I was particularly struck how Jeremy talked about the science he's relied on, as well as how he explained the science behind the 2 approved COVID vaccines. Their conversation shows the ways that physicians and those in healthcare are deeply immersed in science practice. I thought Maine Science Podcast listeners would enjoy hearing this conversation, so Ben has graciously let me post the full episode here. I hope you find it as interesting and encouraging as I did.
You're listening to The Maine Show, stories of ordinary Mainers doing extraordinary things. From Madawaska to Kittery, Lubec to Rumford, and everywhere in between. From the Maine Show studio in Bangor, here's your host, Ben Sprague.
Hey everybody, this is Ben Sprague. Hope everybody's doing well out there, all things considered. Recording this on Christmas Eve, December 23rd, 2020. It'll be posted on Christmas Eve itself, and many of you will listen to it, possibly, on Christmas Eve or Christmas or in the days to come. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year. If you're listening to it before the holidays or during the holidays, but if not, if you're listening to it later, the timing of this recording is in the season of patience. Advent is a season of waiting in many ways. It's a season of darkness, but also of hope and eventual light, and I think that's most appropriate this year, 2020, where cases are really spiking of COVID-19 throughout the country, certainly here in the state of Maine. December 2020 was by far the most challenging month and the saddest month in Maine, both in terms of cases rising and deaths, sadly, also rising. But we also have these vaccines and the hope that comes through them of 2 viable vaccines and perhaps more on the way. There's been images on social media and in the news, video of hospital staff, nurses, physicians getting the vaccine, and now elderly residents of assisted living facilities and nursing homes around the country and here in Maine getting the vaccine that you hope possibly, we've got a ways to go, but possibly the end of this pandemic, at least as we know it for now, might be in sight. Today, we're talking about that with Dr. Jeremy Yardley, a physician at Northern Light Eastern Maine Medical Center, who he himself just obtained the vaccine. And we talk about that, his thoughts on that, and also just what it's been like working in healthcare, working at the hospital here in Bangor over the better part of the last year. Jeremy is also a Bangor High School graduate like myself. We actually grew up the same class, graduated from the same class at Bangor High School, so I've known him for quite a long time. Very grateful for his friendship and for him joining me on the podcast today. We touched a little bit on what it was like to move back to Bangor for him with his family, but really today we're talking about the vaccine and COVID and what the impact has been on his life for the last year. This particular episode of the podcast is brought to you also by the Maine Science Festival and the Maine Science Podcast, hosted by Kate Dickerson. If you search your podcast source for the Maine Science Podcast, you'll find Kate's relatively new podcast, bringing stories of all the positive things happening in the Maine sciences in podcast form, and it's really a nice extension of the Maine Science Festival, which we've talked about here on this podcast before. So please check out that one. And again, thank you to Dr. Jeremy Yardley for joining me today. Without further ado, let's get right into it. A special edition of the podcast. It's episode 123. Dr. Jeremy Yardley.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, buddy. Good. How are you?
Sorry about that. We of course had the 4 o'clock on the dot delivery person come, and the dog went crazy, and it wouldn't have been pleasant.
I can't imagine anybody who's got quite as busy a life as you do right now. So
You
I
know,
appreciate
it's
you.
oh please, this is a nice little escape. It's nice to use Zoom for things that are not meeting after meeting after meeting. So this is
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
How you been?
Pretty good. Pretty
Yeah.
good. All things considered. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
I
I'm
know,
mostly,
right?
hunkered down and
Yeah.
grateful that the kids we've got one in first grade and then one in pre-K, and they've
Okay.
managed to keep up with a 5-day-a-week school this year in Bangor, which has been a miracle. And
I was just saying that to Allison that I feel like that is sort of one of the unspoken, stories of the year that it's sort of flown under the radar how
Totally.
effective that's been. And it just nobody, I mean, I don't know. I feel like that's the feat right there, is that we've been able to do that.
All right. Well, it's good to see you, first of
You
all.
too.
I think we had been aiming to get together for like grabbing a beer or some dinner or lunch or something. And, then the world turned on us, and that's not easy for a lot of reasons, but it is good to have you back in Bangor, and we'll get into that a little bit, but it just, for now, it's good to see your face through the computer here and
You too.
cross paths with you around town now and then.
Yep.
Now we'll get into your background a little bit, and I certainly want to talk about how the experience of 2020 has been for you as a physician. But I also want to say that probably nobody's been as busy as you lately. And even though December 2020 has been a pretty dark month for the world and the state of Maine, you have certainly had some good things yourself. And I want to say congratulations to you and your wife.
Thank you so much.
New baby in the family.
Yeah, no, it's been a real, I think you hit it on the head, is that there's been so much to sort of look, to complain about or to feel bad about, and nothing that's seemingly has gone right. That's been a real bright spot in our families to welcome our new daughter, Madeline.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. His baby and mother are doing well.
Doing really well. Yep. No, that's again, another thing to be thankful for.
Older sister.
Older sister's doing well too, adjusting to the new life of not being the only show in town.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's pretty special, and you'll always remember this time for all kinds of reasons, but especially that. And
for sure.
So apart from that, usually I start these podcast episodes by kind of going back in time a little bit and talking about your background and what led you to today. But I also really want to hit on something right off the bat, which is that you also got the vaccine last week. Yeah. And I was so happy to see your post on Facebook and your photo and your commentary with it. And I could wonder if you could just comment on that a little bit right off the bat about what that was like and how you're feeling.
Yeah, no, it's probably, as I'm going to start talking about this, it's emotional even talking about it. Just, I think for lots of different reasons. This has been a long year for everybody, and doctors certainly included. It's to have such at least a little bit of a light to look toward, and to feel like, okay, we've got something that we're working toward as a society at this point to get out of this mess. I think for me it's just such a tribute to the successes and hard work of people who for the last 9 months have been working on this, and it's great to see that science can win out, and that process has been undeterred in the kind of the storm that has gone on around it. I think too, there's certainly a part of me that I'll be honest, I feel guilty too, getting a vaccine at this point. I certainly recognize the value of our frontline staff and being able to provide not only care for COVID, but care for everything else with regard to the healthcare system. So I certainly understand it, but with parents who are older, with grandparents, with other people who are, I certainly feel, I feel there's a bit of guilt in it too, even though there's a lot of excitement and just gratitude. It's the first time I will say, going into the hospital, aside from two kids being born, where I was giddy going in there, and to have that opportunity was just really, it was emotional to have that happen. I still feel that even talking to you.
Yeah. Well, let me disabuse you of any feelings of guilt. I think you have those feelings because you're a kind-hearted person, but if our physicians go down and our nurses and our hospital staff, then we're all out of luck, because we need you to be healthy. And if you go down, even if you have a mild case and you have symptoms for 2 or 3 days, or even if you have no symptoms at all, but you have to quarantine for 14 days, then that really is a dent to our community. So
I think you hit on that perfectly, is that, I think for so long we look at the healthcare system as being invulnerable, really invulnerable. And to see what would happen when we plan for this even within our group, that if one person, not even just like you said, not even gets really sick, but just has the illness, that if they have any contact with anybody else in the group, that really makes things pretty thin within the group, and the ability to provide care in every area. But for us pediatrics, would be challenged. Yeah.
So you're at Northern Light Eastern Maine Medical Center. And could you just tell us a little bit about what it's been like this year, and how your day-to-day and the way you do your job has changed, and what's even been the mood like, the energy level like at the hospital this year?
Yeah. I think like probably for everybody else, there's been waves where early on there was a lot of fear. I, probably not having said this to anybody else other than my wife, for the first few weeks of going into work back in March, I was crying going to work. I was scared, and I don't really get scared very often. But I, certainly knowing that we had, a second baby potentially on the way, a 2-year-old at the time, not really knowing anything about this, and just, I think, being part of society at that point, doctors were really, and still, for some things, are really on the same playing field as everybody else with regard to the way that information has traveled. It was really hyped up early on that this, not that we're not in a similar place now, but can we even safely go to work? I think that's the part that for me was maybe the hardest up until now. We changed a lot of how we did our jobs. We're not typically in the hospital overnight, and that changed so that the residents who typically are part of our team overnight could shift and plan for what we thought was going to be an impending spike in our area. Thankfully, it didn't happen at that point. I was very impressed by how our hospital, what our hospital did to get prepared, and how people really kind of rose up to make sure we had a good plan in place, both to cover kids and adults and everyone coming in, but also to take care of us. And I think that's something that I've been very impressed by, and I have lots of friends in different hospital systems throughout the country, and they did not feel necessarily the same way. So that's something I've been pretty proud of how they've done things. I think in Maine, we've been there, at least early in the course of this pandemic, we were pretty fortunate that we didn't get hit as hard early, so that we could learn some of the lessons that others had unfortunately had to go through. And really up until now, the hospital hasn't been in a spot where we've had a lot of patients with COVID. Now that's changing, and that's changing a lot. And that's where sort of the ups and downs of how I've felt, I think, moving back in a direction where I'm worried, I'm scared again. I think back to your our original discussion about the vaccine, I'm thankfully feel a lot less scared personally, that, will I get sick? I feel a lot less scared about that, but I worry even more so now than before for our community. And with Thanksgiving having just happened, with Christmas and and Hanukkah and the holiday season in general upon us, I worry how things will be 2 weeks from now, when I'm actually going back after paternity leave, and what am I going back to? But certainly feel a lot more confident that I at least a body that can do whatever needs to happen to make sure we're taking care of our community.
Yeah.
So it's certainly a lot of ups and downs emotionally, both emotionally and physically, just exhausting.
Sure.
Yeah.
It must be hard to see what's going on in other hospital systems too. Like in the early days of New York City, I mean, many healthcare professionals were themselves getting sick and even dying. And that must be hard to, as a fellow healthcare professional, to watch.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we all in the medical field know that we're doing is we're getting into this because we want to serve, we want to help people. And that's I know that's the third grade approach to who wants to be a doctor, but it is also, it rings true now. But I think, what I've seen, and it's not to put a cloud of doom and gloom over things, is that healthcare people are scared. And it was really humbling to see people scared, but also willing to walk into the fight, and not backing down. And because these are the communities they serve. And that's what we know how to do best. But yeah, it was scary to see that across the country, and how different people, even, friends of ours who were part of that early on and still remain that way.
Yeah. Well, the term hero gets thrown around kind of loosely these days, but there's an aspect of that the way you articulated about serving your community and going into work in this very dangerous situation, and hats off to you. And I can imagine the emotion of getting that vaccine. Do you remember? Well, you must remember, but how have they rolled out the vaccines, and when did you find out that you were going to get to be one of the people that got an early dose?
Yeah, no, it's it's funny. I think everyone assumes again that the transit, the kind of the movement of information happens at a different level in the hospital, and I actually I'm privy to a lot more information than most as well. Just being the chief of pediatrics, that I get a lot of the information probably earlier than others. I was on a call actually the day before. Actually, it turns out now, and I'm trying to do this timeline in my head, the day before my daughter was born, because she was actually, my wife went into labor when I was in the hospital at 2:00 in the morning, admitting a patient to the hospital. And so the day before that, I was on a phone call and had mentioned to the person I was on the phone call with, who was higher up in the administration, just saying, I wonder when the vaccine's going to come. Everything that I read about says that it's going to come in the next couple of weeks. They said, oh yeah, we just found out it's going to be coming next week. So it's here. I think you'll get called, you'll find out about this, hopefully in the next few days. And so I actually found out I got a message an hour before I got the vaccine, saying, hey, I think there's an opening for you to get the vaccine. Can you make it to the hospital in the next hour? So
your tires are screeching out of your way.
That's what I said. I said my how old was she? My 5-day-old was at home eating, and my 3-year-old was running around the living room. And I said to my wife, I said, opening's there. How you okay? Can I wheel into the hospital and get the vaccine? So I still remember that, and there was just no doubt in my mind to go.
Yeah. Hopefully all these memories will be nothing but happy ones from this point. Well, it won't be, because January is going to be a rough month, but I mean, hopefully you can draw some happy memories out of this whole time.
Yeah, I think what you just said is perfect. Is, I think that there's so much reason to hope, and there's so much reason to be excited for what's going on, but it has even more so than ever. It's that we need to double down, and really make sure we're doing what we were doing earlier on even better, because even like hope doesn't necessarily translate to outcome as much as we want it to, and we're in a spot now where the next couple months are really going to dictate how we come out of this, and you just want to make sure at the end of this that we can all feel good about how we did this. Again, the help is on the way, but to just finish the job we really have to wear masks and make sure we're really thoughtful about how we interact with other people.
So is that sort of your ask of people? I mean, you're in the inside on this, and what's the message from the inside to the average person out there that maybe fortunately for them, they haven't been directly impacted? They see the numbers going up, they get the messages about what they should be doing, but what's the direct word from the inside? Yeah.
No, and I honestly, I really have so much. I both have gratitude and also understanding for people who are not experiencing this on a regular basis, because we really hadn't been for a long time. And we understand how this can happen. And when talking with colleagues, we understand how this is happening. It's hard to make big changes in your life when you're not seeing the impact right in front of you. That's really, I think that's really hard. And especially going into the holiday season, it's challenging for lots of people to not be around family, not just because they enjoy the holidays, but because we're all social beings. And there's so much about this pandemic it's not directly related to the virus, that, mental health has taken an enormous hit. And it's only, probably we're only scratching the surface of those who have been impacted in that way. People with chronic illnesses who haven't been seeking care are not able to, or only now maybe coming to care when they would have before. I think the big ask that I would have of people is I think it's hard in this day and age to ask this, but I think thinking of other people, even when what is seemingly your population is less likely to be directly impacted by this virus, to think of somebody else's parent or grandparent, to think about, somebody with a chronic illness, but also to remember that young people with this illness die too. And that's that, I'm not going to, give people the wrong, information just to scare people. But I think, the sense of who we are as a society is so defined by our, willingness to be kind to each other. I think we've lost a lot of that. I think that's pretty clear to everyone. We've lost a lot of that over the last several years. But this is such an opportunity for us to say, you know what, this is such a small sacrifice that I have to make to put a mask over my face. My wife's probably going to kill me saying this, but another thing that I have really tried to make quite clear is that when my wife went into labor, she couldn't unfortunately get an epidural. So she had 0 pain medicine, and she pushed a 7-pound child out of her with a mask on. So, the notion that we're asking so much of people to wear a mask when my wife can go into labor and do that successfully with a mask on, I think it's a pretty small ask for people. I think the bigger ask of people, aside from that, is that this holiday season, we really have to be smart. I think it's hard to sacrifice those things, but if we want to have Christmas and Hanukkah and Thanksgiving the way that we've always enjoyed them in future years, this is the time to practice some sacrifice, and to not have these big gatherings and trying to limit them to just your family. I'm never one to sort of throw up what we go through on a regular basis, because lots of people do this, but that's what doctors, nurses do every year. There are people who are in the hospital over those holidays, and that's just part of what we do. We just really ask people do that this year, because we don't want to see family members that wished that they had done that, and have to suffer the consequences of this devastating illness.
Very well said. It's a strange place to be right now, with things getting worse and worse, and also having this great source of hope there on the horizon. That I've been saying the same thing myself to people, that this is a time for patience, and patience is not a quality that we're all very good at individually or collectively.
No, I think one of the other things too is I'm really, and I'm probably getting off topic here too, and this ends up happening to have somebody who I enjoy talking to about this sort of thing, and somebody who hasn't had to hear me drone on about it, is that I'm really not only hopeful for how the vaccine rolls out, but I'm really hopeful too, for how that happens, and how thoughtful we have been and continue to be about how who gets that and how equitably that gets that. I think this is an opportunity for us as a society not only show our science chops and to show this is what we can do to attack something that's novel and has just come upon us, but also how are we approaching this from a community, from a society perspective about, how, who gets this, and making sure that this is not just a haves and have-nots about who rises to the top and gets this first. And so I think that the way that discussion has already been had is something that gives me a lot of hope too, because I think that's a way that we can really show who we are as a people if that's at the forefront of how we're making this happen.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating conversation too about within one institution. How is it divvied up? And then within a community, and then a state, a nation, and then the whole world, because there'll be corners of this world that won't get access to that vaccine for not just months, but maybe years. And we could have a whole series of podcasts about health equity and
yeah, you're right. You're right. So you're spot on. But you're right. Even within our country, seeing how friends at different institutions, how those institutions have rolled out the vaccine. I think some people have struggled in the way they've done that and have not thought it through maybe nearly as well as they ought to have. And I'm again, another thing that I'm quite impressed with how our area has done this. I think that they've really made sure to take care of things in a really both smart and equitable way.
Nice. So you're obviously a proponent of the vaccines, as am I, and I think I'm well down the list, and I'll be patient and I'll get it eventually. And when my number is called, I'll be screeching my tires to get in there to get it as well. But for the time being, I will hunker down, and my employer is mostly letting me work from home and encouraging that, which is great. But
that is great. What
do you say to the person out there listening who, maybe they're very well-intentioned and honest in their thinking, that they want to see how this goes in other people first, or they feel like it's been rushed, or they're just skeptical of vaccines in general?
Yeah. I think that's a really good discussion to be had. And I think there's lots of literature to read about out there. So I think getting this from one person is not something I always encourage. I will say what I have read, but understanding for other people that, reading about this and reading about it from various sources is really important to help solidify the thought process. And I think too often people's sources of information can really send them down the rabbit hole and can get them either worried that this particular vaccine or vaccines in general are not not safe, not suitable for them. I think this particular vaccine in general, we can talk about vaccines at large, but I think this particular vaccine in general, one of the common myths out there that I think is really important to clear up is the speed with which this vaccine went through, or the concern for the speed with which this vaccine went through. And one really important thing a couple of important things to note is that this newer technology that both Pfizer and Moderna have taken advantage of is this mRNA tech, an mRNA vaccine or mRNA type vaccine. This is not this isn't new with the COVID-19 vaccine. In fact, the reason why these companies were able to take off so quickly is because this type of vaccine for actually this kind of virus was already in production and thankfully never really had to be rolled out in any sort of meaningful way. And so a lot of the blueprint for what needed to happen to make this vaccine was already there. With typical vaccines, the reason why the fastest vaccine, I'm probably going to get this wrong, so I don't even know why I'm throwing this out there, I think was on the order of 4 years. The reason why it takes so long is, and I think it's really, really important to be transparent about that reason, is because there's a lot of bureaucracy, and there's a lot of frankly, I don't want to call it fundraising, but fundraising that needs to happen in order for certain steps of the vaccine process to happen. So, a company puts a proposal forth, it gets evaluated for the funding for that vaccine. It may get sent back a couple months later. A change to that proposal is sent to them. It's sent back a couple months later. those steps, steps in the process take a lot of time. And they're not necessary if you have the entire backing of the U.S. government and the funding of the U.S. government to make that happen. So for one thing, we essentially, and I know people probably don't like hearing this from the government, we essentially had unlimited money to make this happen. We had a willing, government to make this happen. So there were a number of different companies all working toward the same goal too. So you had an unlimited amount of money, and you had the different governing bodies working alongside these companies to make this happen in a quick way, so that a lot of those steps that might have exhausted even up to years of time could be eliminated. One of the things that I think the size of the cohorts of the vaccines, so the number of people in the trials themselves, really are quite comparable to the size of the studies that we would see with other vaccines. So that part wasn't shortchanged either. We had probably 3 or 4 months worth of safety data, which is really, really good. One of the things that we don't know at this point about this vaccine, and this is where the timing, it will be helpful as we move through how we'll learn a lot more about this, is we don't know how long this immunity will last. Our expectation would be, based on how this vaccine was created and how we've seen other types of vaccines, what their immunity, what immunity they provide people, we would expect that this would last longer than a few months and hopefully years. But that's one that we won't be able to tell people that until we follow these patients, these people out for longer periods of time. I think critically we know that from a safety perspective, that we would see the negative side effects from this vaccine in a relatively short period of time. And they really didn't see that in any sort of meaningful way. I'm sorry, I'm taking up a lot of the conversation here, not much back and forth, but there's another really important clarification to be made, is sometimes we use language in bench research in medicine that I think is really important to clarify what that means. So side effects, I think, are a really important thing to hit on, is that the side effects that a lot of doctors might talk about are really intended effects or expected effects from a vaccine. So just to clarify that point a little bit more, because there have been lots of articles that have talked about this, is that soreness at the site of the vaccine is an expected effect of delivering a vaccine with a needle into the muscle of their arm. The feeling really crummy for a few days, is also an expected effect. It may not happen for you, and I've actually put this in the social media post that I put on online. That may not happen for everyone, but that is a reflection of the immune system responding to this vaccine. So you're not catching COVID from this. You cannot give COVID to somebody else from this vaccine. So you feeling sick for a few days is not something that's going to put others at risk. And from the several thousand people who have received the vaccine in the trial, but also the hundreds of thousands of providers who received the vaccine to date, there really haven't been effects beyond that point that we've seen. I think we will have rolling data as this continues to move along, and we'll have more information about this. But I think it's really important when we talk about side effects to really hone in on what that means, and that this is expected. And it's not to say you won't feel lousy, but it's certainly a lot more of a desirable outcome than you yourself getting sick from COVID, or God forbid, passing it to somebody else and they receive the negative outcome from COVID.
I think some people think that you're injecting yourself with a mild dose of COVID.
Yeah, that's a great. There are certain vaccines that give small portions of both either dead or live virus as a means to rev the immune system. This is not one of those vaccines. This vaccine is giving, I don't want to go too far into the weeds, but it's giving code. It's giving a coded information for your body to create one of the proteins that your body will recognize to create immunity. It's not something it's not incorporating into your DNA. It's not something that's changing your DNA makeup. That's another important thing for people to realize. This is not gene therapy. This is but it's also not the virus itself. And so there's no way that protein itself, without the rest of the proteins of the virus being created, this particular spike protein can't do anything on its own, but it can allow your body to generate immunity against the virus.
So how have you been feeling in the few days since you got your initial vaccine? And do you have the one that has a second shot?
I do. So they both, at this point, the two that are available, both have 2 shots associated with them. One, which is the Pfizer vaccine, which is what I got, is one where the first shot is given and then 3 weeks later a second shot is given. The Moderna is a shot is given and then 4 weeks later another shot is given. So I've had no symptoms at all. I didn't have soreness, and I had soreness with the flu shot this year. But again, there's a wide range of how people are affected by this. My wife had her vaccine as well, and she had soreness at the site, but did not has not experienced any of the flu-like symptoms, nor have I. So I felt it. I have heard, though, the expectation being that the second vaccine is more likely to generate some of those effects, but that's we can connect later when that happens in a couple of weeks.
I think for the most part, if a vaccine becomes available, whichever one it is, people should just get in line for it.
I think another thing that I look to, because there is uncertainty here, and I think, again, I really can't hammer home enough how it's reasonable for people to be cautious and thoughtful about this, because I think willingly accepting things without thinking them through is never anything I would advocate for. But seeing a lot of our top science leaders who are jumping at this as well and are putting their entire livelihood and reputation on the line it's reassuring to the medical community. So to see, Dr. Fauci, as a person who others have, seen at the forefront of this for a while, to see him jump up willingly, just so that everyone else knows, in being connected to a lot of the docs throughout the country, is providing us reassurance to see that, because we look for certainty. We look for as much certainty as we can about something, but reading the studies and reading the data and seeing our leaders willingly jumping at this is the reassurance that I need, and I would hope to impart upon others, is that this is something that I haven't seen a single physician, nurse that I know that has hesitation about this, which is really great.
Well, that's a very good way to wind down here, and I want to thank you again. And I have a favor to ask that Can we do this again in I would love to. 6 months time? Yeah,
I would love to do that.
There's a whole aspect of your story and your wife's that I want to get into about moving back to Maine, because as I well know, you're a proud Bangor Ram, and your family has grown up in Bangor here. And I wonder if you could just briefly comment as we wind down about how the move back to Maine has been for you and what it's like to be now living and working in your hometown. And then I want to cover that in more detail. And as well, use the phrase rolling data. I want to get back into this with you at some point.
That would be great. No, it's been really great to move back to a place that I had such fond memories of. I left when we graduated in 2002, and came back 14 years later. It's a much different, but still yet a lot of the same that I remember from growing up. There's so many more cultural opportunities, whether it's the music at the waterfront and restaurants downtown. The hospital has grown enormously in that time. It's a great place to raise a family, and I think to be able to practice medicine the way that I want to practice medicine, but also to know that this is a place that I feel so strongly about, with bringing my family back here and raising a family. This was a really a great move for us, and I've loved being able to live here.
Well, much more on that in the future. I couldn't have said it better myself. And again, I appreciate you joining me today. And as you all know, our family has directly benefited from you being back in town, and we're certainly grateful for that. And I just have gotten chills throughout this conversation hearing you talk about this vaccine, and we'll see how it goes over the next few months. Are you optimistic about the intermediate term here? Certainly things are going to be rough for the next few weeks, but what are your thoughts as we look ahead?
Yeah, I'm hopeful, but I don't want to end on a bad note. I'm hopeful. I'm still scared. I'm scared, but I'm really hopeful that I think our community, our state, has risen to the challenge on so many occasions, and I think that's what defines a lot of what I valued coming back here. Is that community is what I think powers this area. And I think that that's something that I have a lot of faith that people are going to do what needs to be done so that we keep our people safe.
Dr. Jeremy Yardley, thank you for joining me.
Great talking to you, Ben.
This is Ben Sprague again. Normally, this is where we play the closing music, and I, as eloquently as I can, conclude the podcast after what you've just listened to, but we have a little bit of bonus content, just a few minutes here of Jeremy and I continuing to talk. Normally, I would try to edit this back into the show so it was a little bit more seamless, but as I mentioned at the beginning, it is Christmas Eve in our household, as in many around the country right now. We're preparing for Christmas, and this content was so good that I wanted to be sure to bring it to you, and I wanted to get this episode out before Christmas, so I'm appending it rather than editing it back in. This was a chance for Jeremy and I to just kind of continue the discussion for a few minutes. So hope you enjoy it. All right, man, that was awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to touch on?
It doesn't take much, man. No, I think that was actually that was cathartic. It's great to be able to. It's great, I think it's great to be able to talk about this. But I think it's been nice to be able to. We have such ability in the hospital to have, change in individual lives and to impact people on a, disease by disease basis. But I think this is where we have, especially in a community like this, where we're not just random doctors going to the hospital that people don't know about, that we actually have some value, just who people know who we are, and right. to use our platform in a way that has some meaning. I think this is where we can be really, not that we haven't been valuable up to this point, but I think this is our moment. I think this is our chance to have some real impact on what's going on. And one of the things I didn't say, and I really I think is so critical, is I you're not going to know I'm going to say this, but I hesitate the hero designation, because there's so much about different professions that I think when you're not in that profession, the people around you are just, are wowed and just don't know how you get through it. So, Shane, my brother, is a, teacher, principal up in northern Maine, or like, I don't know, 40 minutes north of here or something like that. And to just think about what teachers are going through on a regular basis is just mind blowing to me. That would terrify me, to be in the classroom, not knowing, these like kindergarten teachers, like not knowing if these little guys running around are, have the virus, and am I going to bring this home to my family? There's something, while it's scary to be at ground zero of where a lot of the sicker people come, there's something nice, at least, about knowing, or now, early on this was not the case, but knowing, going into a room, that this patient has COVID. It's scary. Actually, one of the first times that I went into a patient room was probably a week and a half-ish, 2 weeks before Allison was due to deliver. And I remember thinking, going into that room as I'm gowning up, like, if I don't do this right, I am going to miss the delivery of my daughter. Not necessarily because I would get, I mean, I certainly could easily have something really bad happen to me, but just if I get sick with COVID-19, I'm not going to be in the delivery room. It's not happening. And so that, at least that person I knew they had COVID. And so I could prepare myself, but to be in a classroom with all these people, or to be a truck driver delivering food across the state, or, I think about it every time I go to the grocery store. I'm the person, and people probably yell at me, I'm the person who, is talking with the manager about when are we going to get to the point where we are mandating that people are wearing masks? We're putting people at risk here. And so to see the person, the bagger who's needing this to make ends meet, having to have, people walking through, even if they are masked, but even if they're maskless, to have them walking through, putting them at risk every single day. This is where I think, coming at it from the community perspective, and I think is where we shine in our area.
And it's really hard for a lot of people in the sciences to communicate. It's sometimes a divergent skill set. And you see how popular and grateful people are for Dr. Shah and Dr. Fauci in Washington. You can be that level of communicator because you have the skill set. And
watching Shah talk is it's like watching a performance. It's really, that's just because, seeing him answer the questions from the press and watching how he does that with such grace, even when some of the questions are just, they're asked in sort of sometimes in a, not in a well-intended way, but he handles that and turns it in a way that receives it so well, but delivers the message that it's really quite beautiful watching him deliver. The guy has done a phenomenal job. He really has.
Well, you can be that. I mean, you've got the skill set for it, and you're going to be one of our great medical leaders for the generation to come. So
appreciate that, Ben.
Okay, thank you again to Dr. Jeremy Yardley from Northern Light Eastern Maine Medical Center. Really appreciated that conversation. I think that Jeremy he communicates this stuff so well, doesn't he? I think he is one of our current and future leaders on this front, and I appreciate him joining me on the podcast today. Hopefully we can record again at some point to give some updates on this and also talk a little bit more about his story and background. I alluded to it in the podcast there. I mentioned I had a personal connection with him. When our third child was born, he's 2 now, but he had some complications after he was born. We were in the hospital for the better part of a month after he was born, and there was one procedure that needed to be done, and none of these folks could quite do it, and the baby wasn't responding well to the efforts, and in walks Jeremy Yardley, takes our baby, who was literally, just a couple weeks old at that point, and I don't know exactly what it was. I think it was a lumbar puncture of some kind to do a test, and he did it, and he was the only one that could really figure that out and get it done. And I credit him with really making a huge difference in saving our baby's life in his early days of life back in 2018. And it's pretty special for me to be classmates with Jeremy Yardley, both of us products of Bangor High School and the Bangor School Department, and to have him walk into that hospital room and take care of business was great. And so I'm forever grateful for it, grateful to him, our whole family is, and I'm so happy that he is now settled in Bangor with his own family and making such a positive difference here in this community. And I expect more great things from him to come. Anyway, thanks again, everybody, for tuning into this podcast. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. If you did, please share. It helps spread the word about the message of today's podcast, which I think is especially important, and also helps spread the word about the podcast so more people can find it, which I do appreciate myself. Thank you. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. We'll talk to you all again soon.
You've been listening to The Maine Show with Ben Sprague. Find us on iTunes, on the web at www.mainshowpodcast.com, and check back each Tuesday for a new episode.